Good evening and welcome to tonight's lecture of the Dallas Architecture Forum featuring the distinguished speaker Stephen Lewis. My name is Nate U. Daly, the Executive Director of the Forum. We're grateful that you've joined us for this virtual program this evening. The Dallas Architecture Forum educates, enriches, and connects our community by presenting programs and events, creating experiences, and engaging both global and local thought leaders from the design fields to enhance how we live. The Forum is grateful for our sponsors who made this evening possible, and we're pleased to recognize them at this time. Our lecture season sponsors are Maharger Development, Reggie Graham, and SMEEK. Their leadership support throughout the season enables us to present our lectures, and we're very grateful for them. We're also thankful for our series sponsors whose support have made this spring's lectures possible. They are Eggersman Kitchens and Home Living, Faisal Haloum Group, Headington Companies, HKS, Jackson Walker, Kafka Properties, and Modern Dallas. Again, their support makes our spring lecture series possible, and we thank them very much. And our sponsor for this evening's lecture is Page. We're honored to welcome our new board president, Eurico Francisco. Eurico is a widely respected design leader in North Texas, and we look forward to working with Eurico to continue to advance the Forum's mission, along with the rest of our board, our sponsors, our donors, and most especially all of you, our valued members. Eurico, please introduce our distinguished speaker, Steve Lewis.
Thank you, Nate. I also want to welcome you to tonight's lecture and thank you for your support of the Forum. I am honored to serve as the Forum's board president, and I look forward to working with you as we continue to elevate the vision for inspired design in Dallas and North Texas. Stephen Lewis, FAIA NOMAC, is widely recognized as one of our country's most prominent voices for equity in architecture. His leadership includes service as the national president of the National Organization of Minority Architects and being honored with the AIA's Whitney M Jr. Award. Stephen Lewis has worked in both the public and private sectors in New York, Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., and Detroit. Steve was a founding partner of the firm RAW International in Los Angeles, where he helped to build a successful design practice and collaborated with ZGF on memorable projects, including the Exposition Park Master Plan and the California Science Center, projects that made a positive difference in the fabric of their communities. Following his time with RAW International, Stephen joined the U.S. General Services Administration's Office of the Chief Architect in Washington, D.C., where he worked to create a legacy of civic architecture for our time and advocated for design excellence in projects across the country. In addition to his focus on thoughtful design, Stephen demonstrates a commitment to equity in the profession that infuses every part of his professional life. He's a Loeb Fellow at the Harvard GSD and holds a Bachelor of Architecture from Syracuse. Steve served in the Detroit Planning Department with Maurice Cox, where they advanced the ambitious mission of helping to revitalize the city's urban neighborhoods. He also was a professor in practice at the University of Michigan, focused on community issues and urban planning. Steve is now a principal for the Los Angeles office of ZGF, where he leads the urban design practice with projects that include a major office complex in Sacramento for the state of California. In all aspects of his career, Steve has prioritized cultivating the next generation of diverse architects and designers. The Forum is honored to have Steve speak for us this evening. Please join me in welcoming our distinguished speaker, Steve Lewis.
Well, thank you so much. It's really an honor to be with you this evening. And following that introduction, those are always awkward, but I'll accept the the good wishes and goodwill. We don't often take time to reflect on what we do every day throughout this career, and when one stops and reflects, I think the measure is what the ripple effect has been of what we've done, and I'm very honored, humbled to have been put in positions where my voice has contributed to moving the profession forward, particularly in the areas of justice, equity, design, and diversity and inclusion, which I'll be speaking about in my talk tonight. But it occurred to me, and my talks are very fluid based on the timing of our circumstances, and this is an extraordinarily historic time, given the events yesterday around the Chauvin trial. I think we all have that top of mind today. But it brings to light the idea that many of us, some of whom you know, still don't know a lot about in that sense as aspiring practitioners seeking an opportunity to leave some legacy mark on the horizon that represents culturally who we are. Perhaps as the GSA doctrine was, that 100 years from now, when people look back to this year to wonder what we were like as a society, they'll see the evidence of that in what buildings and spaces we've created in our time. So I think it's really important. I've always felt it's been very important to make sure that authorship is diverse and representative in fairness to all of us. But first, let me say I'm really honored and excited to see Julie Eisenberg as your upcoming. She is one amazing, wonderful architect who I've looked up to for a long time, and we've had some great interactions, but you will certainly enjoy Julie. Given this idea maybe that we've been partially or fully hidden in plain sight as colleagues, I thought it would be good before I start talking about the Justice, Equity, Diversity, Inclusion JEDI agenda, that I give you a little bit of background on me and my path. That will create a context that will maybe hopefully make the diversity remarks more meaningful. So I will go ahead and share my screen. And I'm hoping that the audio and visual is working as well as it did in our little check-in the other night. If not, I'm sure I'll hear from you. It's a good.
It is, Steve. We see your images and we hear you well. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll begin, just as I said, with a little trip down memory lane and trace my path for you from awakening to inspiration to action. So at around 7 or 8 years old, I was innocent, like most of my friends who I went to school with and who we shared neighborhoods with. And like everyone, we watched these programs that were available to us in the 60s, you know, Donna Reed, Dennis the Menace, Andy Griffith, and so on. And we did not necessarily have a racial awareness as children. We thought our identities were reflecting back what was on the screens, and we had a family, we had dinner every night. It was fantastic, and just like they did. And so we just sort of had no awareness. We certainly weren't seeing many Black folks on TV, except that when you turn the channel in that same time period, you might see this going on, the civil rights movement, Dr. King, and marches for things that should sound very familiar because all these years later, it's playing out in our streets in our communities all over the country yet again. But I'm the oldest of 4 kids and very close to my father, who was an architect. This is him, Roger Lewis. He, through his example, I think my commitment to social justice, particularly within the practice, was a very organic and natural thing, because as a young child and then a teenager, I watched as he started his own firm with 2 partners, the kinds of obstacles that were thrown in front of him every day, and really learned from that and had great empathy and compassion for what his cohort was enduring as they sought simply to do, you know, when we get bitten by the architecture bug and fall in love with design, it's a bad mistress. It'll make you write bad checks. I mean, everybody goes into this thing with the similar aspirations, and, you know, Black architects were no different. And so I learned under him, and I learned from his sense of duty to community. He's a Harlemite, grew up in Harlem. A lot of our careers together were in restoring neighborhoods and buildings in Harlem, which is lovely for me to go visit. My dad passed about 3 years ago at the age of 88. No regrets, beautiful, full life, legacies intact. Went back and visited the project that we worked on. He poured 20 years of his life into this amazing transformational project, and it indeed has transformed a neighborhood in Harlem near Columbia University. So I come from good stock, but to the idea of awakening and inspiration, he was part of a team that was commissioned back in around 63, 64 to design the Venezuelan pavilion at the 64, 65 World's Fair in New York. We lived about 20 minutes from the fairgrounds in Flushing Meadows. And I would often accompany him as he went out to the job site to do constructions. We don't say supervision, administration. And I, as a kid, an 8-year-old kid, I was watching the World's Fair being built. It was just marvelous. And I didn't connect any of the dots in terms of my future decision to enter the field on my own. But it was on reflection that I noted that these experiences were really seminal and pivotal. And of course, when the fair was completed and it opened, we as a family went as patrons, we paid our admission, we went in, and we just were, fascinated by the possibilities offered, the visions. In particular, I had my Halloween costume at 8 years old was an astronaut's costume. I really was into space, and you crossed over the highway to the science pavilion, which was a beautiful colored glass, kind of glass infill of cells of some crazy block, a beautiful building and rockets. So I was kind of done. I thought I was done at that point. And of course, the Unisphere, can recall when it was lowered into place, and it was just all kind of fantasy, marvelous. But at the same time, this rising vibration in the streets, we didn't have social media and the immediacy of media that we do today. But the Black community had a very active grapevine and network, and so events and struggles and victories, when they happened, were well broadcast through the network. And so there was this growing awareness. There was this racial awareness on my part. I talked to my parents often about what this was all about, and they were participants in it as they aspired to live an American life and face challenges that they should not have had to, as many and all of our cohort did. So it took a trip to Jamaica to discover some family roots and a bit of a bathing under the Dunn's River Falls to have this moment of cognition, this moment of realization of what I really needed to do. Joke. But I did make a decision. I weighed all of my choices for architecture school and decided to attend Syracuse University. And what I thought I knew about the profession through my growing up in a house with a father who was an architect, all got blown to bits upon my arrival and my introduction to a pedagogy and a curriculum that was theory-based and opened my eyes to a whole new understanding of architecture. And so I can say legitimately that I fell in love with it all on my own. Wasn't trying to necessarily follow in my dad's footsteps. But there was, pressure then to assimilate into a kind of mold, a very, Eurocentric architecture focus, modernism. While I was, I think in my sophomore year, Werner Seligman arrived as dean, and he was amazing and really sort of whipped the whole school into shape as he saw it. And we were, disciples of his pedagogy. And many of us have gone on to do some pretty amazing things. So it wasn't bad, but this idea that the richness of other cultures that could have been brought to the design conversation were simply not permissible or of interest. And so it is now that we're in a time where this idea of expression, of cultural expression, is reaching kind of a fever pitch. many panels lately about Black space. What does that mean? Safe, secure, and conversations about how cultural identity can be expressed through abstraction or through literal representation in architecture. So my career, from the time I was a student, I actually got my work study job going from sitting at a desk at a dormitory, checking people in as they went by while reading, studying material. I got that move to a job at the Syracuse Onondaga City County Planning Agency. And I got my first little foray into a public agency and public service. And then fast forward to graduating and moving from New York to Los Angeles, I went into partnership in 1984 with two other gentlemen who I had known previously, who were at a corporate firm, and we just decided to start this thing raw in 1984. And so I had 20 years with my partners building this practice, so very well established in the private sector, knowing the good, the bad, and the ugly about practice. But then leaving that to go join GSA and the federal government in the Design Excellence Program in the Office of Chief Architect, which was just an incredible 4-year experience, being on the other side of the table, getting to learn and understand the kinds of things that resonate with decision makers who are going to be hiring architects like us to do major projects. We, as a firm, had felt that despite our accomplishments and our accolades, that there was still a glass ceiling that we had a hard time breaking through. And I've been gone from the firm, although not gone from my partners at all, for since 2004. So it's almost 20 years now. And I must say that I hold it's the greatest source of pride, the accomplishments that the two of them have been able to achieve post my tenure. And it's some of the same struggles, but certainly moving up in capability and possibility and accomplishment. So it's back and forth. So after that, you know, it was an opportunity to work for Mayor Duggan in the city of Detroit as the urban design director. Could not refuse my friend Maurice Cox, who incidentally did his first internship as a freshman when he was at Cooper Union in my father's office in New York City. So I've known Maurice since 1977. We're kind of brothers from history. And it was a pleasure to come try to do something special with him in Detroit. And I believe he's spoken to you, to the forum, and he's told you all about our work in Detroit. So I'm not going to get into that tonight. But I will say that I'm now back on the private sector side, full circle, with ZGF Architects, an organization with 6 offices and about 750 people, and a most wonderful group of passionate, empathetic, compassionate colleagues who I am very pleased and happy to be among at this time, especially because I'm not going to affect the change that I'm called to make, preaching to the choir, as it were. So as much as I respect Kurt Moody, our gold medalist this year, first Black firm ever, who has a large firm, and I'd love to go work with Kurt as part of a legacy play, but I can have more impact if I'm in an environment with white colleagues, many of whom, most of whom, if not all of whom, are feeling this sense of the moment and just wondering how to walk along a righteous path toward justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And so I'm of greater usefulness, let's say, in this environment. Of course, NOMA still is a call for me as well. And I just wanted to share some of the highlight images from work that we had done, particularly while I was with my partners. And it's stuff that many of you could look at and be proud of if you were the authors, but just amazing against, you know, odds. You know, we had Kaiser Permanente as a major client for years, and we did the most complicated adaptive reuse building renovation projects that they ever could possibly think of. A cardiac unit renovated completely while still in operation. And we did all that stuff. But breaking through to new building or medical office building, that just wasn't happening for us, you know. So anyway, we have our crosses to bear. But that's context for me, how I came to be in this profession, how I evolved in it, and how I've carried this message of social justice within the profession forward, and now have a greater opportunity. Sadly, took the death of George Floyd and so many others, and even since then, new victims, to get the window of opportunity flung open to have these kinds of conversations and to start this journey of 1,000 miles with the step that I can provide tonight. So yeah, you know, PowerPoint 101, never just read what's on your slide. So I kept it short and sweet so you guys could have the ability to see if you were, you know, investigating something, you look for the facts. So you find this evidence and you start to analyze it, and then you'd start to influence through that acquired knowledge how you judge people, facts, events, and so forth. So this sort of history that the country is not yet confronted head on, we're getting closer through these events of recent time. But the wealth and the greatness of the country could not be possible without the free labor of enslaved people brought from Africa. And so it is looking at that beginning as evidence of a certain resilience that humans have. And in this case, it was people dragged from Africa to work enslaved here, that demonstrated what any human group would under any circumstances, which is a will to survive, to in any way thrive. And the resources that they brought with them were often utilized by plantation owners, slave owners, and it did, that culture of building and design worked its way into plantation architecture or town architecture in the case of Monticello. So following the emancipation, which is kind of funny because many people, including myself, only recently understood what this Juneteenth holiday was. And the Juneteenth holiday is actually the day 2 years after the freeing of the slaves by Lincoln, that the last group of enslaved people were actually informed that the Civil War was over and that slaves had been freed. So that's the holiday. But anyway, there was a 10-year period roughly after the end of slavery known as Reconstruction. And it was a period during which Black people went from 0 to 60 in that 10-year period, holding office in the Senate and Congress. Because of segregation, the need to provide goods and services to that segregated community, and that meant businesses. And so wealth was created from the very beginning. Land ownership, things were moving forward rapidly, and so rapidly that white society determined that it was not going to happen. So the Jim Crow laws were put into effect. Things like convict leasing, which rounded up vagrants, quote unquote, who were formerly enslaved men who had gathered to talk about ways that they might progress themselves, but then were rounded up by law enforcement the day before plantation owners would come to that town, and then have the ability to lease these quote unquote convicts to go back and do the work that they had done as slaves at about 1/10 of the cost to maintain an enslaved person. And so the tendency was to work people until they dropped dead and then just go back and lease some more. Surprisingly, this structure of convict leasing persisted in certain places up and through the 1950s. But anyway, to get off of the horror of all of that and to talk about the connection and the resilience connection, I tell you, architecture serves some powerful Kool-Aid, because when you drink it, you are going to find a way, one way or the other. And these three architects are really stellar examples of people who would not be denied, who went to extraordinary measures to be able to practice, who never forgot duty to community aside from clientele, and have now been more daylit and we're learning more about these historical figures. In fact, of course, Paul Williams was the AIA gold medalist posthumously in 2016. Ferdinand Tandy, he was the first Black graduate of Cornell's architecture school, and he did St. Philip's Episcopal Church in Harlem, where my mother was a choir member. And I had the pleasure of convening a panel several years ago on the 100th anniversary of the building, where my mother sat in the very same pew that she used to sit in as a young girl. And I took a beautiful photograph of her. So that's a memory that I hold on to of that building and of my dear mother, who followed my father a year and a half later, and are both looking down on us, enjoying hopefully this talk tonight. But Tandy also worked for Madam C.J. Walker, and he designed her villa, I can never pronounce it, Lorero, in upstate New York, which Madam C.J. Walker was the first woman millionaire in the country, not Black woman, but woman, period, millionaire. And she did it based on her line of hair care products and personal care products that catered to Black women. Paul Williams needs probably no description. He was an out-of-the-box chameleon of an architect. He could change styles or merge styles as appropriate for the client and the context, and he did so fearlessly. And so we know now of his work, and we appreciate it as we should. And then lastly, Norma Sklaric, who is so dear to me and my former partners, Roland Wiley and Stephen Lott. She hired the two of them at Gruen Associates. You see her at the table on the left among her peers as some anomalous individual who managed to not be deterred by anything that might have come her way that might have deterred a normal person. She was superhuman. She was brilliant in her ability to hold her own and accomplish greatness at large majority-owned firms, and to bring people like Roland and Steve into the fold, and to be incredibly harsh on them, knowing that they would need to be twice as good as the people sitting next to them in order to get recognized and to advance. And we credit Norma providing much of the foundational work that led us to be able to stand on our feet in 1984 and build a practice that continues to thrive today. So in Detroit, I really started to become aware of the number of cities around the country that had experienced urban renewal in the way of federal highways, erasing thriving Black communities to make the path of least resistance from the suburbs into the city, to allow people who had basically done the white flight out of the inner city and surrounding communities to the outer suburbs, provide the most efficient and rapid way to get in and out of downtown without having to rub up against whatever undesirable community was left behind. So there's a lot of action right now among state departments of transportation to provide restorative justice by improving these projects or removing them. And so that one such project in Detroit, I was able to bring into the design studio at Michigan, and for 2 years have students explore what that kind of restorative justice might look like in the way of urban fabric and so forth. Really gratifying. So I'm now working on a real project in Portland, Oregon for a similar situation. So if we've been hidden for all this time, how do we present ourselves to the greater world, having built a body of work over generations? Who will tell the story? And this is a series of media pieces that I started when the selection for the African American Museum History and Culture in DC was being competed. And the question was, would we as Black Americans have the opportunity to tell this story? And it was complicated, but in the end we did, through the partnership of Freeland, Ejay, and Bond, the Fab Studio. So, okay, let's do just look at a quick update. 52 years ago, Whitney M, it's more than that now, gave a speech at the 1968 AIA convention where he basically challenged architects in attendance who were not in any way, meaningful way, paying attention to the ills of our urban cores, not focusing on that at all, but pursuing the bright, shiny object stuff. And he has his quote that says, "You're not a profession that has distinguished itself by your social contributions to civil rights. You are most distinguished by your thunderous silence and complete irrelevance." It's kind of ironic that at that conference, there were Black architects in attendance, and 12 of them caucused together after the speech and determined that they needed to take some action, and then NOMA was formed shortly thereafter. But as of this month, the numbers are 2,378 total licensed Black architects in the country, 502 women, 1,876 men. Now, the AIA's large firm roundtable, 60 largest firms in the country, have made an existential goal. Like the net zero goal, they've made the diversity challenge, the 2030 diversity challenge, and they are committing themselves to doing everything within their realm to double the number of licensed Black architects by the year 2030. And in rounded numbers, that means another 2,500 people. That over 10 years is 250 newly licensed Black architects a year. I don't know whether we get 15 a year right now. So the pipeline is incredibly important. And capturing our graduates before they siphon off into another adjunct profession because they maybe hadn't been treated well throughout their architectural education. We need to hold on to them. We need to nurture them. We need to put all hands on deck to actually make this work. I'll share with you slides of a number of my colleagues who I believe are just doing us proud and really, undaunted by any obstacle and just out there and being received, most recently in quite a different way than we have historically. So I will just stop on these shortly each and give a little insight and see the minds working there in that portrait. Jack Travis, a very dear friend. Jack has authored what are called the 10 principles of Afrocentric design. And he's linked them to environmental design and sustainable design in ways that are pretty eye-opening and very interesting. And on the lower right, this is a project that he's been able to work on these projects as a cultural consultant with architects like the one on the lower right, Frederick Fisher, did the Kalahari apartments in Harlem. And Jack designed this kente pattern for the brick facade, which was then through computational design, rationalized and figured out so that the bricks laid up perfectly and it's this beautiful pattern. So culturally appropriate in Harlem? Yes, I'd say. Interesting. Terry, the next two that I share with you are disciples of Phil Freeland, who, for those of you who know him, understand immediately his brilliance. For those of you who don't, he was probably our most prolific Black architect practicing. He had his firm, the Freeland Group in Durham, North Carolina. They were merged with Perkins and Will about, 6, 7, 8 years ago now. And Terry started with Phil when he had his own firm before he merged and stayed with him. And now she's out on her own, taking the same notion of design excellence that Phil exhibited and now delivering it in a very unapologetic and proud way. And Victor Vines as well grew up under Phil's wing, and now he's doing fantastic projects like the Durham County Municipal Library, our main library, which has won several awards already. And Victor, they have not been on their own for very long, but they're out of the gate doing incredible things. Wow. I'm so glad that Damaris Hollingsworth is in this deck because Damaris practices in Minneapolis. She is at ground zero. And Damaris is an immigrant from Brazil, Black woman, who got a full ride to Arizona State. And then after graduating, got a job with a firm in one of their local offices in Phoenix, and she elevated to actually running projects for them, major projects. Then her husband got transferred to Minneapolis, and so she went with him, and she transferred. They had an office in Minneapolis and maybe headquartered there. It's an acronym firm, I can't remember which one. And she was unfortunately not put in a position commensurate with what she had already proven through her experience with them. She was put in a much more mindless, sort of brainless, subordinate role. But she felt such an obligation to be with them, since they had done a lot of extraordinary things to facilitate her being in the country with an H-1B visa, et cetera, that she felt this obligation. And one of the partners, who was aware of her past, who was in that office, came to her one day and says, you do not owe us anything. You are free. If you don't look you don't look happy, if you'd like to go, you're free. And so she did. And beyond that, other things happened, but she wound up starting her practice, I think in 2019 it is. And she said she was struggling to actually cultivate opportunities into real projects. There were a lot of, what ifs, maybes, but getting them into the, signed contracts was proving to be very challenging. And then George Floyd happened. And I swear she said that not a day since has gone by where her phone hasn't been ringing off the hook. So she's busy, but she's also an empath, and she's really struggling with the events of this week. And I just believe, she's part of an incredible future. Another group that came out of the woodwork, a firm in New York City and Brooklyn called Me and General Design. What? Yeah. So General is his brother here, General Judd, and his wife, Christina, who is me. And they come out of the film industry. They're not licensed architects, but they have such a sense for design and for storytelling through procession that they have cultivated a group of clients, high-end clients. They're allowing them to get their design vision really out there in the built environment, and they partner with other architects to make sure that all of their stuff is well executed and is tight. But they're quite a fascinating couple, and again, fearlessly just following the drive and the inspiration and inspiring all of us at the same time. And I'll share lastly, Dina Griffin. Dina is an exceptional practitioner in Chicago with her firm Interactive. Dina has collaborated on 2 major commissions with Renzo Piano, and most recently is the associate architect with Todd Williams and Billy Chen on the Obama Presidential Library. Her practice is in Chicago. So amazing group of people. I know you're going to have Michael's partner coming up shortly as a lecturer, and Michael at Mass. Michael was a student at Harvard during my Loeb Fellowship year, and so we got to know each other before he sort of disappeared and went over to Rwanda to do the Butaro Hospital, which kind of launched Mass and put him squarely on the map. And now Michael's got a public interest design firm that employs over 80 people and is working completely in the public good. So I'm very blessed to have Michael as a friend and a collaborator. On the left, you see Brian Lee. I'm sure the younger members of the forum and members of your firms will know about Brian because he has stood up Design as Protest, DAP, as a center for advocacy and direct action in 4 different sort of buckets. So Brian is left the corporate firm environment. He was with EDR in New Orleans for quite a while, SQ Dumas Ripple, to start a Collocate, another nonprofit public interest design firm. And there is a former colleague of mine from DGF who decided a couple of years ago that he needed to make a move so that he could be more supported in his activism toward justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. So through his organization, Designing in Color, they speak often and are part of panels and seminars and do visual presentations about equity and design. So this is an area that many firms have embraced through the 1+ program that began as a 1% with John Peterson. And I think that this is really work that we have to be more focused on. And so let the young folks inspire us. Another very important piece of all of this, working in communities, all of a sudden we're all paying attention to the communities that we had ignored for a long time, and we really want to do good and do well. But there's an art to meaningful engagement beyond checking a box that you conducted some, meetings and put up some presentation boards. And I constructed a seminar class at University of Michigan and taught for 2 years this class, Designing with Community, based on real world experience that I myself was getting humbled and brought into a new state of awareness for how to respect the voices of people who are accustomed to being voiceless, and the patience and discipline that requires, and the humility. So it fosters this saying that Maurice likes to say came from, I think, Africa. My managing partner at ZGF, Ted Hyman, says it's Jewish. So I don't know where it came from, but it sure has resonance. Nothing about us without us is for us. And with that, I say thank you very much.
Thank you very much. All right, can you hear me?
Can hear you, yes.
All right, good to see you both. And on behalf of the forum, Steve, I really want to thank you so much for talking with us this evening. I know that it's a timely discussion. It's something that we're all trying to figure out these days. There are no easy answers, but I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us about your experience. And for those of you who are in the audience right now, we're going to take a few minutes. Daniel and I are going to take a few minutes to talk with Steve about some of the themes from his talk just now. My name is Kate Aoki. I'm a member of the board of directors with the Dallas Architecture Forum. I'm here with my colleague, Daniel Gunn, who is also a member of the board. So just briefly by way of introduction, I'm head of exhibition design at the Dallas Museum of Art. Sorry, my dog is running around in the background. I came to architecture because I grew up around a couple of artists and designers, and it had always sort of been in my family. My dad was an immigrant from Japan, and he brought that artistic sensibility with him, and met my mom, and that the rest was just sort of history. I couldn't not be an architect. Like you said, Steve, it just sort of runs in your blood, and when it does, you can't ignore it. So Daniel, can you take a few minutes to introduce yourself and tell us how you became an architect?
Yes, my name is Daniel Gunn. I'm currently a designer with Oglesby Green, a firm here in Dallas. I actually started my journey pretty early. Actually, I actually wanted to be an artist as a little kid. So I was always drawing everything that I saw. I always kept a pencil and paper in my hand. One day my dad was noticing that I like to draw a lot. He was actually a carpenter by trade. So he kind of guided me in that career path toward architecture. He said, hey, so you can draw pretty well. Why don't you just pursue architecture as a career field? Rather than being a starving artist, I said, okay, Dad, I'll do that. So he kind of got me in the right path to pursue architecture as a career. I'm glad he did. I really enjoy it now.
So that actually, Daniel, that's a perfect segue into getting this conversation started. So you, Steve, and me were all exposed at an early age to arts and architecture. So we knew very early that there was a path for us, and we had parents who could help us with that path. But in thinking about the staggeringly, horribly low numbers that Steve presented, 2% of architects being Black. In Dallas, it may be hovering around that same number. So I'm wondering, Steve, if you can talk to us about how we start to get more BIPOC and AAPI kids really interested in architecture and the arts.
Sure. I think it's happening from two ends to meet hopefully in a real sweet spot in the middle. One of those ends is creating a pipeline at the early ages, middle school if possible, but junior high school at worst. And then there is greater opportunity for us at this moment for admission to school, for nurturing through school, for nurturing through the post-graduation ARE licensing preparation. It's never been this inviting and open to us as it is right now. So my answer to your question is different today than it might have been 6 months ago or a year ago, which is that opportunities to practice where we are installed as thought leaders, because we're now working in communities of color where we have cultural competence that naturally positions us at the lead of how we come in and we, kind of engage with stakeholders and residents and, go forward with designs that are, reflective of and sensitive to people's wants and needs. We become the interface in a way and the path to bringing resource to situations. And I mean, there's a lot of Black money out there, and Black money, when it seeks out Black creative talent, produces some phenomenal work of, well, there's lots of examples of how that plays out. So, I would say lastly, Kate, that the pipeline is not just something that's fed from one end, it is continuous. So it requires nurture at every stage. So if you're a firm owner or a partner in a firm, and there are Black folks in your firm, they need to be now really seen. They need to be understood, and value that may be different and enhanced from what it was 6 months ago because of this cultural awareness that there's greater value in that person that can be exploited in a positive way. They need to be elevated. They need to be, advanced as role models so that the pipeline, every segment of it is visible, right?
I feel like that's a good opportunity for Daniel to talk a little bit about his project at the Pro, talk about getting recognition and putting faces to names, et cetera. Daniel, can you talk a little bit about your piece at the Pro?
Yes, definitely. So back in January, my design was chosen to celebrate the achievements of Black STEM leaders in various fields such as architecture, science, and medicine. But in my design, I chose to highlight two Black architects that many people don't know of, I've never heard before, and that was Paul Williams and Norma Sklarek. And through my design, it really gravitated people to have a conversation about architecture and how can we as African Americans or people of color contribute more to architecture and pursue it as a career field and career is an option as well also. So I was really happy that my design had such an impact on the community of Dallas and people, all around. I really hope that this will continue to spur the conversation about how can we encourage young, minority children to get involved in architecture and become interested in it and actually, excel in it as well. And Steve, you highlighted that one thing that you said really stuck to me was like that you felt that you have a greater impact as a majority white firm versus going to a minority firm, and that's a really powerful statement there. Do you feel that you truly have a great impact there versus going to minority firm?
Well, that's a loaded question. Yeah. I think that the platform that I've been afforded in this current role allows me to speak truthfully and frankly with many of the CEOs of the largest firms in the country. Most, if not all, are white, and most of which are men. And so when that truth to power seems to resonate and produces commitments to move us forward, the scale potential of that intervention exceeds what might be possible in other scenarios. I will say, I could probably have as much visibility in a large firm like Moody Nolan, but Moody Nolan's doing fine without me. These other folks need us. They need compassionate care to say that, Black folks are traumatized by 400 plus years of enslavement and sublimation. White folks are traumatized by that very same history, having to now come to grips with the foundational, the financial foundation of the country, being, on the backs literally of enslaved people. And, how do you just like come to a sharing agreement about justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, where everyone is equally valued, has the same amount of opportunity, and is celebrated the same, irrespective of race. And the history is an integral part of our DNA of who we are. So that can be utilized for the good, daylighting that, coming to grips with it. It is what it is. It ain't going away. It ain't changing. So we just need to look at it for what it is and be able to have constructive conversations about it. And how does that make you feel, 60-year-old white male, or how does that make you feel, 25-year-old Black woman in the same firm, And I will say that the AIA has their Guide to Equitable Practice, and in it, there's a chapter on cultural competence, and that includes 20 plus quotes from different personas who express the impact of their identity within the workplace, which I would highly recommend. I did a program with I have a monthly program at ZGF called Lift Our Voices Equally for Change. That acronym is Lift Our Voices Equally. Hello, love for change. And I have a guest every month, except about 2 months ago, I decided not to have a guest, but rather to take each of those quotes from that chapter and assign them to a person within our firm. Staff, partners alike, just gave them random, each had one, and we had a sequence, and we went through and everyone read that quote in their own voice, owned those words for just a minute, and became a powerful communicator of the emotion that we have as humans, that we struggle with. We have to survive. We have to do what we have to do, but we can be of such, as and society can function at a much higher level if we're all just in this thing together, right? So, when individuals who aren't familiar with, other races and having interactions find themselves in a situation where, they go to a party and all of a sudden they're the only white person in a room of 20 people, that's a bit of a wake-up call. That's like shock therapy right there, but it starts to bring about an awakening. The question is, how do you create those opportunities where a white person is the only one of 20 in a room? And when that happens, the experience of Black joy is powerful. It's contagious, it's infectious. And, I think we have to build allegiances and allies one person at a time, right? And in doing so, we'll get to a critical mass. I have to be hopeful about our future. I have no choice. I have a 36-year-old daughter. She's going to be the future. I have to honor that and leave it all on the field. Having an opportunity to talk to this audience gives me great pleasure to spread that message with love,
Steve, thank you so much for the amazing presentation, and Daniel and Kate. We have a question from an audience member saying, please comment on how possible, practical, and critical it is to give young Black minds access to design experiences, internships, accessible camps, etc., to empower them as future citizens.
Great question. I can speak from experience that when we started our NOMA Project Pipeline Summer Camp about 12 years ago now, I guess, this camp was operating in a number of the NOMA chapter cities. So maybe the first year we had maybe 6 or so programs going on. But the one in LA where I was, we had about 15 young people attend that first year. Their parents brought them in, gave them an orientation, and they had 3 Saturdays in a row where they came to this place and we did this great work with them. 15 children, well, about 2 years ago, the number crept over 100 and it stayed there. Black and Latino kids mostly. A few white kids come into the NOMA camp. It's all good. And we have this amazing experience. And each of the chapter cities has been doing their own flavor of the camp. But in mass, we're producing many more, exposing many more kids to what we do. They experience it. They love it. And several of them have enrolled I have a young man who's at Woodbury University in Los Angeles area. He's a sophomore. He started as a young kid in our camp, and he came back, and after a couple of years, he came back, and he was still a high school student. We made him we made him work at the summer camp. So he's now mentoring these younger kids himself. He's a sophomore at Woodbury. He needs to fulfill an internship from May to August, and I've got him. He's going to be my intern. Work with me on the Freedom Writers Training Institute down in Anniston, Alabama, which is a project that I've been cultivating for the firm to do meaningful work. The firm wants to be in places like Detroit, where I am right now, doing meaningful work. And I think we're one of 60 firms. Everyone is kind of beating that drum, marching that beat. So I'm so hopeful about 2021 and moving forward. The hard question is, will we sustain the focus on this issue before the next bright, shiny object comes and steals our attention away? This is a righteous path we've entered. There is no getting off of it. We can pretend we're not on it if we're so seduced into some other mind frame, but we got to be conscious, seeing where we are, and consciously, intentionally moving ourselves forward together.
Yeah. Another question related to that. How can we begin to have these conversations with leadership and peers in majority white firms?
Well, it sounds like that came from a person of color. And so I would say you have to be courageous. I won't tell you not to be angry. Each of us has to be authentic in our own skin and use that authenticity and put our vulnerability in full view. Because I think this is the moment when ears are open, when antennae are up. And if you're ever going to get a empathetic, compassionate response to your inquiry about, we want to be visible, we want to play a role beyond what we've been able to do. And if they say, I don't know what you're talking about, get back over there and open that Revit model, then you go back to your desk, pack your stuff, and say, have a nice life, whatever. Have to be courageous more than anything. Courageous enough to walk out that door without knowing exactly what's next, but have faith in whatever you have faith in, that through your actions you will produce some good result.
Speaking of kind of getting the younger generation, Dan, you want to talk for a second about some of the mentoring you've done at City Lab, which is a high school here in Dallas for kids that want to pursue careers in architecture, environmental science. And a lot of the kids there are kids from minority backgrounds that really are getting a chance to kind of learn about design.
Yeah, so this actually last summer, 2020, I met with other architects in Dallas to work with high school students to develop a design for our environmental center in a low-income area here in Dallas called The Bottoms. And the students are really enthusiastic to work with us to come up with a design concept for an environmental center. And we met with them for about once a week, and we sat down with them. We drew Part T diagrams. We had them build models, 3D images. And they're just really enthusiastic to be around architects to really learn what we do to improve the environment, the built environment. So it is a really great experience to be involved with kids and like working with them to show them what we do, what it entails to be an architect, and what we do every day. So it was a great experience.
Yeah, you're a fantastic role model. Steve, here's a comment from someone who I think is one of your friends, Kate Diamond. She says, to my good friend Steve, normal to be so proud of being part of your message, but I suspect she would also be horrified that there are less than 2% Black architects and only 502 Black women in the AIA today. And she says, thank you for all you do and your message of love.
Oh, thank you, Kate. I love you, girl. But Kate was Norma Sklaric's partner. They had a firm, Siegel Sklaric Diamond, and they were trailblazers. And they got their space in the history book along with Paul Williams and our other. But I was thinking, another thing about this moment and how to get our young people interested is like, we actually have some sexy figures now. You got David Ajay, who's like the coolest guy on earth, and people like Phil, may rest in peace, whose, wife Nina Freeland is a famed jazz singer. So there are people now entering this media sphere of popularity and beauty, and they are turning heads. And you'll see posts from young people about pursuing architecture that would really, they surprise me. So it's a sort of a new new collision of technology, immediacy, and just presentation.
Yeah. And I'm pleased we have a comment here from Mattia Flabiano with Page, who's one of our sponsors and also a leader of one of the, obviously, large firms. And he says, as one of the 60 firms that Steve referenced, we're committed and will not lose focus. The journey will continue and we will be relentless. So, and I know other firms have taken very strong stands too. So I think thanks to Steve and other people, there's a growing awareness. And I think there are many firms that are doubling down in their resolve to make change happen that needs to happen. So, so I want to thank you, Steve, again for sharing with us, challenging, timely, and crucial. And Kate and Daniel, thank you for being a part of the conversation. We really appreciate all that you're helping to do, and others with you. Again, the local NOMA chapter here in Dallas, Fort Worth, and other places to be involved and be working together. One more question from this is a student at City Live High School that we mentioned briefly. She says, she says, I wonder why I should enter the architecture field if the numbers and reality is so stark. Feeling unwelcomed and not appreciated sounds risky as a dream. So,
well, if you flip that on its head, by being one of a few, you have a greater opportunity to make your mark. And so seize the moment, carpe diem, seize the day. I think it really, honestly, in all seriousness, depends on what excites you. And if you drive down the block or walk down the street and you see a building or you go into something and you wonder, like, how wonderful is this? And you have thoughts about things you would create, then you fight all those battles. There's no easy route to anything. Anything that you want, you have to be excellent. And that's going to take pain, blood, sweat, and tears. But there's no greater gratification than engaging those challenges and beating them. Being in the fight every day, but you're still, there to fight. And that's character. That's the stuff that makes your life rich. Short-term stuff, the whole axiom, no pain, no gain, came about for a reason. So we got to pay our dues, do your thing, but you got to bring joy to it.
So two more comments, one from Walter Street saying Black female architects have actually increased twofold in a decade. So, I mean, it's a small base, but there's positive movement. And then from our local DFW NOMA chapter, Brian Graham says that project pipeline will be this summer, 710 to 717, to continue promoting architecture young students of color. So again,
Awesome.
Get involved with DFW NOMA, info@dfwnoma.org. And again, we want to thank you, Steve, for speaking for the forum. Again, join us for Julie Eisenberg in a few weeks. And for all of you, challenge is great, but I think we will stay focused and go for it. So thank you and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.